4,000 years. Not a straight line, but a cycle. Order, corruption, collapse, renewal. From the Yellow River's mud to the palaces of Chang'an, from silk caravans and paper to gunpowder and markets, from emperors and exams to a modern state. Why do dynasties fall? And why does China keep reuniting stronger than before? What turned a country into a nation that remembers? In the next hour, we'll read the map, rivers and frontiers, ideas and institutions, the mandate of heaven. This is the entire history of China. To read China's past at speed, track 3 lines: the rivers, the frontier, and the road. The Yellow and the Yangtze feed capitals and famines. When floods recede, states rise. On the northern edge, steppe riders test walls and strategies. When hoofbeats fade, ideas shift. Along the roads, caravans, tribute, and missions. Technology and belief migrate. Paper, gunpowder, Buddhism, the exam ideal. Dynasties move to a rhythm. Order, excess, breakdown, renewal. The mandate of heaven is the story engine. A moral audit more than a myth. Bureaucracy, markets, and families knit the map together. When one thread frays, the others pull tight. To track the century, read ledgers and canals. To track the people, read villages and lineage halls. In 1 hour, we'll jump centuries but keep our bearings. Who taxes and feeds? Who commands and persuades? What moves along roads and rivers? And how ideas survive defeats? Hold those 4 questions, and the names may change, but the logic remains. Open the map, find the rivers, follow the frontier. Watch how a country becomes a nation, and why it still remembers.
If this helped you think straighter about China, like the video and subscribe.
Oh, and don't forget to try the new hype button. It's like turbo applause for the video.
Chapter 1. Mandate of Heaven. Start with a simple picture. A ruler sits at the center. A state spreads out in rivers and roads, and heaven, understood as the moral order of the universe, watches. When the harvest is good, taxes are fair, and soldiers are disciplined, the realm feels aligned. That alignment is called the mandate of heaven. It is not a crown you wear, it is a score you earn, and it can be lost. The idea took classical shape under the early Zhou, who explained the fall of the Shang as heaven's judgment. The message was radical and practical. Legitimacy is conditional. If a house rules well, heaven favors it. If a house rules badly, heaven withdraws its mandate. Floods, famines, and corruption aren't just bad luck. They are signals that the moral center has failed. In practice, people read those signals in 3 registers. First, in the skies. Eclipses, comets, and strange halos were logged by court astronomers and debated by ministers. Second, on the land. Floodplains silt up, granaries run dry, and bandits multiply along neglected roads. Third, in the court itself. Factions harden, edicts contradict, and the emperor's ear moves from principled counsel to flattery. When enough signals align, the story turns. That turn rarely begins at the capital. It starts in the margins, frontier garrisons, hungry counties, ambitious provinces, where local officials raise troops to save the realm, or charismatic leaders preach justice on heaven's behalf. Rebellion, in this logic, is not merely a crime. It claims to restore the moral order that the center has betrayed. When rebels win and govern well, their victory retroactively proves the mandate. When they loot and burn, they reveal that they never had it. Mandate framework matters because it ties weather, welfare, and war into one narrative. Drought and locusts aren't only natural disasters, they become evidence in a public trial of the dynasty. Tax reforms and relief granaries aren't mere policy. They are moral medicine. Even court ritual, fasting after an earthquake, issuing self-criticisms, remitting punishments, works as a visible apology to the cosmos. This cycle does not mean history repeats in neat loops. Each turn brings new tools and new maps. Hydraulic projects tame some floods. Paper and print spread new ideas of duty and merit. The exam system knits villages to the capital, turning scholarship into a ladder, but the rhythm persists. Consolidation, prosperity, overreach. Then fiscal strain, frontier pressure, elite infighting. Then a break, sometimes sudden, sometimes slow, followed by reconstruction under a new house that promises to rectify names and care for the people. Listen for the language. When edicts speak often of nourishing the people, when inspections expose corrupt magistrates, when relief opens the state granaries, the story leans toward renewal. When memorials are punished, roads go unrepaired, and palace projects soar while fields starve, the story leans toward loss. The mandate gives critics a vocabulary and loyalists a conscience. It makes morality a public technology. It also explains a paradox that surprises outsiders. Why a dynasty's fall can be remembered not as the end of China, but as a cleansing storm. The civilization continues because the ideal of righteous rule survives the rulers. The new house inherits the bureaucracy, the calendar, the rites, the roads, then tunes them to its own music. The examinations resume, the river levees are rebuilt, the legal code is amended, and the temples host new inscriptions. The past is not erased. It is reinterpreted to prove that heaven has moved on. For our story, the mandate is a compass. It shows us where to look when prosperity falters or rebellion rises. It teaches us to read disasters as debates and reforms as arguments in a cosmic court. With that compass in hand, we move from principle to practice, from the idea that rule must be righteous to the system that tried to make unity last.
Legal, lethal, and very into standardized everything. Buckle up for Qin.
Chapter 2. Qin Unification, 221 BCE. Before unity came competition. In the warring states, Qin sat in the west, hardening itself with cold laws, strict ranks, and agricultural reform. Under ministers like Shang Yang, fields were registered, households counted, merit in war promoted by numbers not noble birth, and private farming incentivized to feed soldiers. The goal was simple: more grain, more steel, more state. By 221 BCE, the project reached its climax. The Qin king declared himself first emperor and abolished the old patchwork of feudal domains. In their place, he installed a grid of commanderies and counties run by appointed officials who owed their power upward, not sideways. Law replaced lineage. Registers replaced favors. The center could finally reach the village. Standardization turned unity from slogan into system. Scripts were regularized, a small seal norm against many local hands. Weights, measures, and coinage were unified. Even wagon axles were calibrated so roads, ruts, and checkpoints aligned across the realm. A radial road system, broad, straight, rammed earth, pushed from the capital to the borders, carrying troops, mail, and orders at imperial speed. The same ambition built defenses and canals. Earlier frontier walls were linked into long defensive lines, signaling a new border consciousness along the northern steppe. In the south, canals stitched watersheds together to move grain and armies more efficiently. These projects were not abstractions. They consumed people, labor conscription, taxes in kind, and endless corvée pulled farmers from fields and sons from homes. Legalism supplied the operating system, rewards and punishments sharp as a chisel. Dissenting schools were curtailed, archives purged of texts the court deemed subversive, and speech itself folded under law. Ritual that once balanced power was subordinated to command. The emperor's will traveled on bamboo slips and arrived backed by force. At the same time, administration thickened. Seal, tally, and file knit the empire into a working bureaucracy. And yet, the machine outlived its master only briefly. After the first emperor's death, a murky succession and palace intrigue jarred the center. Rebellions flared in the countryside, led by minor officers and desperate farmers who claimed to act for justice against misrule. Within a few years, Qin collapsed under the weight of its own speed. Unity had been achieved, and then unspooled. But the story does not end with rubble. The Qin model, counties and commanderies, standardized tools of governance, roads radiating from a commanding capital, proved too effective to discard. The next house would inherit the structure, soften the edges, and sell it to the people not as fear, but as order. That is the paradox. The shortest dynasty cast the longest administrative shadow.
Same empire, better bedside manner. Pack your bags for the Silk Road and Statecraft.
Chapter 3. Han Dynasty, Silk Road and Statecraft. Han begins with a negotiation. Keep the Qin engine, counties, commanderies, registers, roads, but tune it to a moral key. Law remains sharp, yet the language of rule changes. Emperors patronize the classics, ritual frames politics, and officials are praised not for terror, but for care. The state learns to say, power serves order, and order serves the people. The synthesis works because it is practical. At court, ministers debate policy in moral terms, but count grain in ledgers. Ever-normal granaries buy when prices fall and sell when they spike to stabilize markets. Monopolies on salt and iron, and sometimes liquor, fund border wars and infrastructure, while testing how far a moral state should go into business. Famously argued in the discourses on salt and iron. Taxes shift between labor and coin as harvests and armies demand. Abroad, diplomacy rides with cavalry. The steppe confederacy to the north, most famously the Xiongnu, can raid or bargain. Early He Qin treaties trade silk and marriage ties for quiet frontiers. Later, Emperor Wu turns to offense, fortified corridors, colonies in the northwest, and long campaigns that seek to break alliances and secure choke points. The empire now thinks in gradients, not edges. Westward, an emissary named Zhang Qian returns with a map of possibilities. Heavenly horses in Fergana, powerful states around the Tarim, routes that knit China to Central Asia. The Silk Road is not a single road, but a web of oases, taxes, interpreters, and gifts. Silk goes out as diplomacy and currency. Jade, horses, glass, and stories come in. Ideas move too. Buddhist hints arrive on the same winds that carry merchants and envoys. At home, the bureaucracy thickens into habit. District schools train talent. Recommendations and examinations begin to formalize merit. A literati culture takes shape. To govern is to write. Memorials and histories become tools of persuasion, and conscience.
臣以食言，
Sima Qian's grand history reads rulers as characters in a moral test.
施以垂
Its
见。
courage costs him dearly and teaches later officials how to argue with emperors without unsheathing a sword. Technology and craft widen the state's reach. Iron foundries scale production for tools and war. Hydraulics feed fields. The crossbow standardizes as lethality. Paper technology matures, traditionally credited to Cai Lun in 105 CE, turning archives lighter and learning cheaper. The coin of the realm, the round coin with a square hole, circulates widely, knitting markets to the taxman's count. Wheelbarrows and roads bring harvests to depots and armies to borders. But success brings strain. Population grows. Great estates aggregate land and exemptions. Smallholders sink into debt. Frontier garrisons demand supply. Court factions weaponize principle. Portents multiply.
时关利病。
Earthquakes, locusts, and eclipses become punctuation in ministerial memos. When reform stalls, prophets find crowds. In 184 CE, the Yellow Turban movement lifts the language of salvation and justice against a weary order. The dynasty fractures, not with a clean fall but a long unspooling. What endures from Han is less a face than a framework. The conviction that a vast realm can be managed by text, laws, ledgers, and ritual, guided by a moral vocabulary that the people can judge. The map is now mental as well as physical. Routes to the west, routes through the exams, routes by which a village youth can become the state's voice in his county. With Han, China becomes legible to itself and legible to neighbors. It is an economy with granaries, a state with roads, a culture with a canon. And when that house finally cracks, it leaves behind a script that rivals and successors will fight over. Sometimes with swords, often with stories.
More generals than granaries, strap in for 3 kingdoms and the art of not agreeing.
Chapter 4. 3 Kingdoms to Jin. War, Legend, Fragmentation. The Han order does not fall in a single night. It loosens, granaries fail, commands conflict, until strong men turn governors into warlords.
郭伯利，
因度所辖，
3 coalitions harden into the maps we remember. Wei in the north under Cao Cao's heirs. Shu in the southwest under Liu Bei and Zhuge Liang. And Wu in the lower Yangtze under Sun Quan. Each builds a different strength.
文书与骑兵
Wei weds cavalry and bureaucracy.
成汉正统，以贤任士。
Shu sells legitimacy through Han inheritance and talent. Wu learns to live by rivers, ships, and rice. War professionalizes. Recruitment scales. Depots multiply. And supply by water becomes the art that decides campaigns. Red Cliffs, 208 CE, is the hinge. Fire, wind, and seamanship blunt northern mass and save the south. From then on, China is not a single battle space. It is a system divided by water and culture, where movement demands engineering, bridges, ships, locks, and trust. Strategy becomes a public literature. Manuals circulate. Letters and memorials are copied.
3日内归还。
Zhuge Liang's campaigns and stratagems are retold for centuries. Later storytelling, Romance of the 3 Kingdoms, will mythologize loyalty and cunning. But the lived reality is regional. Families choose sides to survive. Local gentry arbitrate between state and village, and refugees move by the hundreds of thousands towards safer riverlands. Even as swords clash,
按九品中正和
institutions
七情望语
mutate.
才学，
Wei refines the 9-rank system, grading talent through elite recommendation. Efficient, but tilted toward great clans.
缺员今日不足。
Shu experiments with merit talk to compensate for
任县顾
size.
问出身。刚那碗强湖的蒸饺，
Wu deepens a riverine state where
治水
naval
及治
craft
国
and waterworks are a civil service.
周师与水利同级，同为国脉。
Across all three, paperwork and personnel matter as much as the spear. Who gets grain? Who gets posted? Who can read the orders? In 265 to 280, the map briefly converges. The Sima clan takes Wei from within, then conquers Shu and Wu, proclaiming a Jin dynasty that reunifies the realm. But consolidation conceals fractures. Court princes feud, the War of the Eight Princes. Fiscal strain and land concentration hollow the base, and northern steppe powers press hard. In 311 to 316, Luoyang and Chang'an fall. Western Jin collapses. The dynasty reforms at Jiangkang, Nanjing, as Eastern Jin,
成晋统序以将未成。
while the north splinters into short-lived regimes often
今
called
日
the
一旨，
16
新令
Kingdoms.
西行。
城头换地
Division
换，
remakes
法度日日改。
society. Northern elites migrate south, carrying books, rituals, and techniques. The Yangtze heartland thickens with emigre lineages and wet rice expansion. In the north, mixed courts blend steppe cavalry with Chinese administration. Some rulers patronize Buddhism and classicizing projects to stabilize rule. Translation centers flourish, most famously with Kumarajiva at Chang'an in the early 5th century, making sutras readable and meditation schools imaginable. Monasteries become granaries of text and charity, and caves at places like Dunhuang begin to bloom with art. Fragmentation is not only loss, it is also experimentation.
有灾减政
New tax registers, regional militias, hydraulic fixes, and theological debate.
乡兵守乡路，各按排职业。
业寇过度，
Poetry and landscape painting learn to speak of exile and mountains.
在风口
Philosophy bends toward inward cultivation as politics wobbles.
水卫们周可连行。
性与空相参，可安其心。
The ideal of unity survives, but its path now clearly runs through the rivers. To reunite China, a house will have to master water and move grain at continental scale.
先通粮，后平乱。
The lesson of this era is that identities adapt. China persists across courts because texts, roads, and rites travel with people. A scholar can flee a capital and still be legible to another court. A monk can cross a frontier and still be fed. The map is broken, but the culture is in motion, and so is the technology to stitch it back together.
We're threading grain to capital and verses to history. All aboard the Grand Canal to the Golden Age.
Chapter 5. Sui and Tang, Unification and the Golden Age. Reunification begins with logistics. After centuries of division, the Sui House, late 6th, early 7th century, stitches north and south with policy and stone. Land registers are refreshed, household counts return, and the equal field system is reasserted to spread taxable land more evenly across families. Armies are reorganized, roads are scraped straight. Above all, a grand artery is cut through the continent. The Grand Canal, tying the grain of the Yangtze basins to the political heart in the north. Grain can now move in bulk, reliably, and cheaply, enough to feed capitals and armies without starving the riverlands that grow it. Centralization runs hot. Sui law sharpens, and corvée labor rises to feed walls, roads, palaces, and canals. Early victories expand prestige, then ambition overreaches. Costly campaigns against Goguryeo in Northeast Asia drag on, bleeding men and legitimacy. Revolts multiply. Within a generation, the Sui burn out. Yet their instruments, the canal, the census, the habit of reaching across the whole map, remain ready for the next house. Tang inherits the tools and adds a grammar of rule. The court shapes a classic administrative architecture. 3 departments to draft, review, and issue policy. 6 ministries to run personnel, revenue, residue, wage, justice, and public works. A refined law code pairs clear penalties with careful procedure, becoming a model referenced for centuries in East Asia. The Fu Bing militia system and frontier garrisons share the burden of defense. Circuit inspectors ride to check provincial power. The examination path expands from recommendation toward a broader ideal of merit, teaching a generation to argue government in elegant prose. If Sui solved supply, Tang incubates culture. The capital, Chang'an, becomes a planned universe, wide avenues, walled wards, foreign quarters, markets at set hours, and palaces nested like ritual diagrams. There, caravans and embassies meet pilgrims and poets. Persian and Sogdian merchants run stalls. Music from Central Asia enters court orchestras. Buddhist monasteries sponsor relief, translation, and travel. None more famous than Xuanzang, who walks to India and back with scriptures and a map of the Buddhist world. Taoism converses with state ritual. Confucian learning frames the civil ideal. In this cosmopolitan air, poetry becomes a public art. Li Bai throws ink like starlight. Du Fu turns suffering and duty into form. Painting and calligraphy find a shared discipline, brush, breath, and balance as governance in miniature. Frontiers define the tone. To the west, Tang compounds and protectorates anchor trade routes across oasis states. To the north and northwest, Turkic and later Uyghur steppe powers partner or press. To the southwest, Tibetan strength rises into a rival empire that can raid the capital's gates. Success requires flexibility, gifts and marriages when arms would break the budget, force when gifts invite contempt. At sea, Guangzhou grows into a maritime gateway where spices, glass, and texts slip into China, along with communities who read and pray differently. Prosperity breeds scale. Scale courts fragility. Tax in kind and labor obligations weigh on households as estates and exemptions grow. The equal field allocations thin as population rises and registrations slip. Regional commanders amass troops loyal to men more than ministries. In 755, the general An Lushan turns from frontier strongman to rebel. His coalition barrels down the Grand Canal's supply lines toward the heart. The rebellion and the wars that follow shatter confidence, depopulate regions, and demand foreign cavalry to help restore the capital. Recovery is real but incomplete. Court finances rebase. Military authority deconcentrates. And a later reform shifts toward a two-tax system that chases coin rather than grain allotments. Yet the creative core outlives the shock. Even in retreat, Tang leaves blueprints. Law codes, ministries, and exams become exportable tools. Poems and histories become shared memory. The canal keeps feeding the north. The habit of seeing the world as a connected economy persists. When the dynasty wanes at the edges, it still rules the center of imagination, a standard of elegance and administration to copy or rebel against. The Sui and Tang together teach a structural lesson. Unity in a continental space is a supply problem before it is a slogan. Solve grain and movement, then refine institutions, then curate a culture that persuades elites and commoners to cooperate. If you fail to maintain the balance, if generals grow too private, if taxes grow too blunt, if reform sleeps, then even the best poems cannot feed the garrisons. But if you keep the canal open and the exams credible, the center can recover more than once. For our hour, this chapter moves us from engineering to elegance and back again. We watched power travel as grain, then as paper, then as verse. We saw a cosmopolitan court try to be both empire and neighbor, both model and market. What remains are the scaffolds, a way to write laws, staff offices, move food, and imagine belonging, usable by whoever next unifies the map. Less cavalry swagger, more city clever. Make way for merchants, movable type, and a bang or two. Chapter 6. Song Dynasties, Innovation, Markets, Gunpowder. The Song story opens not with cavalry but with cities. Kaifeng, the northern Song capital, is a living market. Night stalls and tea houses, bookshops and theaters, guild lanes and inspectors with bamboo tallies. Copper cash clinks through a dense web of exchange. Contracts and credit grease the gears. Officials count grain, but also count prices. Government is still a moral stage, but it must now manage a bustling economy that moves faster than edicts. Technology accelerates administration and culture. Printing explodes. First woodblock, then experiments with movable type under Bi Sheng. Classics, commentaries, and handbooks multiply. Primers reach counties. Almanacs guide farmers and magistrates alike. What was once rare becomes routine. A village student can study standardized texts and dream of the capital exams. A state that governs by writing now governs at scale. Reformers try to match institutions to this new speed. Wang Anshi's new policies loan seed and tools to smallholders, green sprouts, reorganize militias, baojia, and target price stability. Conservatives answer that the state should tax, not trade. The argument is moral and technical at once. How to fund defense and public works without crushing households or letting magnates privatize the commons. Even when reforms are rolled back, the habit of treating policy as an adjustable machine remains. On the land, food supply decouples from northern weather. New rice strains from the south, fast-ripening champa varieties, spread in the Song era, allowing double cropping in warmer regions. Irrigation, dams, and field manuals systematize technique. Population surges, towns thicken, and the tax base widens, even as estates and exemptions test the ideal of equal burden. The empire learns that prosperity can be engineered with water and print. Borders expose the limits of prosperity. The Khitan Liao and the Tangut Shijia test the northern and western frontiers. The court of northern Song pays, bargains, and fights in cycles. In 1127, the Jurchen Jin take Kaifeng in the Jingkang calamity, carrying off emperors and archives. The dynasty does not die. It sidesteps. The court reroutes at Linan, Hangzhou, and the southern Song stage begins. Smaller map, bigger harbors. Seaward, the economy finds a new horizon. Quanzhou and other ports become global marketplaces where ceramics, tea, and silk sail out, and spices, aromatics, and silver flow in. Chinese junks lengthen hulls and master monsoon routes. Maritime customs bureaus and merchant regulation mature. Paper money, first regional notes like jiaozi, grows from local convenience to fiscal tool. The state learns that credit, like salt, can be a monopoly if you manage trust. Gunpowder leaves the alchemist's table for the arsenal. Fire arrows and bombs, then fire lances and proto-rockets appear in manuals and on walls. A navy with paddle wheel craft and trebuchets throws flames at river battles. Gunpowder at sea becomes an equalizer against heavier northern foes. The military never dominates Song politics, but the Song teach war to respect engineers. Ideas evolve with circumstance. The civil service examination path expands and hardens into a national ladder. Families invest in sons who invest in books. Neo-Confucianism systematizes ethics and metaphysics. Zhu Xi's commentaries propose a disciplined way to read the world and the classics at once. Painting refines a scholar's eye. Landscapes as moral geography. Brushwork as self-cultivation. Urban life becomes a subject. Bridges, vendors, festivals, and winter lamps crowd hand scrolls like news from a different century. And yet the worry never fades. Can a state of scribes withstand riders and sieges? The Southern Song answer is to turn weakness into specialization. Walls are made clever. Fleets are made quick. Supplies ride canals and coastal routes. And diplomacy buys time. The bargain works for generations. But it relies on paying attention faster than enemies can move. On the steppe, a new coalition is learning to move very fast. The Song teach us that innovation is a system, not a spark. Print needs schools. Paper money needs courts. Ports need rules. Rice needs water. Exams need a canon. When those links hold, a society feels modern, centuries before machines of iron. When they fail, when coin supply thins, when factions paralyze policy, when border strategy is split, the smartest city cannot guard the frontier alone. We leave the Song with streets still bright and ledgers still busy, but hoofbeats gathering beyond the passes. The empire of markets will meet an empire of movement, and both will discover how wide the world has become. Time to swap ledgers for saddlebags, make room for horse archers, fresh maps, and a very different admin style. Chapter 7. Mongol Yuan. Conquest, Integration, Administration. The Mongol story begins with speed. On the steppe, power is logistics, remounts, relay stations, and the skill to split and rejoin armies across hard country. That system, discipline, signals, and a ruthless merit, breaks regional walls from the Jin in North China to kingdoms along the Silk Roads. When Kublai Khan claims the mandate and declares a new dynasty, the task changes. Tame speed into administration. He builds a capital to prove it. At Dadu, present-day Beijing, the court lays out a rectilinear city with walls, markets, and palaces scaled to a world empire. North of the Great Wall, the steppe still matters. South of the passes, canals will. Kublai extends and repairs the Grand Canal to tie the Yangtze grain basins more tightly to the northern court, ensuring that cavalry can sit in a rice-fed capital. Governing a conquered majority requires mixture. The Yuan recruit across frontiers, Chinese literati for texts and records, Semu various categories, often Central and West Asian specialists, for finance, astronomy, and craft, steppe nobles for command. A formal social order gives Mongols precedence, then Semu, then Northern Chinese, then Southern Chinese, an index of trust and timing rather than innate worth. Exams resume, but with changed quotas and content. Merit lives, filtered through conquest's anxieties. The postal relay yam becomes an empire's nervous system. Fresh horses and staffed stations carry orders, envoys, and intelligence from China to Persia. Passports, PAIZ, certify identity in metal and wood. That throughput has side effects. A Pax Mongolica where merchants, monks, and mapmakers can move with unusual safety, and where knowledge compounds. Persian cartography speaks to Chinese astronomy. Gunpowder recipes travel the other way. Textiles, medicines, paper and printing techniques, and artistic motifs ride the same roads and sea lanes. Money and grain are constant puzzles. The court experiments boldly with paper currency, Chow, trying to finance a vast army and palace without hauling metal. When issuance outruns tax capacity and trust, notes sag. Reforms try to repeg value to tax in kind and salt revenues. Salt, tea, and maritime customs at ports like Quanzhou become fiscal pillars. Foreign merchant guilds and legal brokers adapt to new rules, while smuggling and fraud test them. Religion and culture are not afterthoughts. They are tools. Kublai favors Tibetan Buddhism ceremonially, while also patronizing Confucian and Taoist institutions to keep scholars engaged and local rights intact. Translation projects flourish. Calendars are recalculated. Drama, Zaju, blooms with city wit and moral bite, giving voice to a mixed, often uneasy society. Painting shows horses with step strength and landscapes with a literati's long breath. War never quite leaves the ledger. Maritime campaigns against Japan fail in storm and logistics. Expeditions into Southeast Asia meet climate, disease, and resilient kingdoms. On land, large garrisons and granaries must be maintained across flood-prone plains. The state's solution remains movement. Canals, depots, forced labor drafts when money can't hire enough hands. Each solution carries political cost. Each cost makes the next draft harder to collect. Then, the shocks stack. Climate swings shorten harvests. Floods breach levees. The plague rides the same safe routes that carried silks and scholars. Populations shrink, tax registers thin, soldiers go unpaid, and local strongmen promise order that the center struggles to supply. Rebellions in the south and along the Grand Canal coalesce, most famously the Red Turban movements, mixing millenarian hopes with practical hunger. The empire's strength, vastness tied together, becomes a vulnerability when links break. Yet the administrative experiment leaves deep marks. The North is now decisively integrated into a China-centered political story. The canal network and northern capital will persist into later dynasties. Techniques for long-distance command, the relay post, the passport, standardized seals and tallies, become part of the governing toolbox. The very idea that China sits inside a larger Eurasian traffic is normalized. Maps grow wider, tastes grow broader. The next rulers will inherit both roads and headaches. A hungry capital, a canal that must be kept clear, a multi-ethnic elite, and a public that has seen the world. To read the Yuan correctly is to see both conquest and adaptation. A mobile elite learned to sit still, if only for a while, and to govern a grain state without surrendering the habit of fast decisions. When the mechanism stalled, it wasn't because movement was wrong. It was because movement needs buffers, fiscal reserves, flood control, trust in money, and institutions that put down roots as well as paths. The Ming will claim to restore, but they will also keep what worked. New dynasty, fresh paint. Bring your sea legs for Zheng He. than your hiking boots for a very long wall. Chapter 8. Ming. Voyages, Walls, and Restoration. Restoration begins on paper and in fields. The Ming founder, Hongwu, resets registers, counts households, and tries to put land back into accountable hands. The state revives village organization, Li Jia, refills granaries, and narrows elite exemptions. Law stiffens, ritual is sharpened, and officials are told to serve with frugality and fear of heaven. The message is plain. After foreign rule, China will be ruled correctly by text and tillage. Then the map tilts north. Under Yongle, the court marches to the old frontier logic. Move the capital to Beijing. Build a palace city, the Forbidden City. Repair and extend the Grand Canal to feed it, and keep cavalry near the steppe. Northern campaigns test the treasury, but keep pressure on Mongol coalitions beyond the passes. The court also looks seaward, briefly with astonishing ambition. Between 1405 and 1430, Zheng He sails treasure fleets across the Indian Ocean. Deep draft junks carrying diplomats, doctors, craftsmen, and gifts rather than settlers. The voyages project ritual supremacy and gather intelligence. They map winds and harbors, repatriate envoys, and display the empire's ability to move. Then politics turns inward. Costs, court debates over priorities, and renewed northern threats end the program. The ports do not close, private and tributary trade continue. But the state's blue water moment passes. If ships recede, walls advance. Earlier earthen ramparts along the northern frontier are rebuilt in brick, studded with watchtowers and beacons to speed signals and concentrate defense. The Great Wall in its most iconic form is a Ming artifact. Less a single line than a system of fortresses, patrols, and logistics. The gamble is that a fixed-fed northern capital plus a robust wall and garrison network can buy security. Sometimes it works. Sometimes the frontier bites back. Most dramatically in 1449, when the Zheng Tong emperor is captured in the Tumu crisis. A shock that hardens defensive thinking for a generation. Coasts need tending too. Pirates and smugglers, labeled wokao, often mixed Chinese and Japanese networks, harry shorelines and river mouths. The court oscillates between prohibitions on private overseas trade and regulated openings. Local commanders, merchants, and officials improvise. By the mid-1500s, maritime customs houses, licensed trade, and foreign enclaves, like the Portuguese at Macau. Inside the realm, commerce hums. Cotton spreads as a cash crop. Workshops scale porcelain at Jingdezhen. Markets thicken around county seats and river ports. Printing multiplies manuals and fiction alike. Dramas and novels, later celebrated as Ming vernacular, sketch a busy, witty urban world. As silver from Japan and the New World filters through Asian circuits, taxes and prices silverize. The single whip reform simplifies many levies into one payment, in silver, making the budget legible but tying it to global flows. When silver surges, the state breathes. When it dries, through war, embargo, or trade disruptions, the treasury and villages wheeze together. Politics cycles between activist consolidation and brittle faction. Scholar officials argue morality and method. Eunuch secretariats manage palace access and intelligence. When either side monopolizes the center, reform sours into vendetta, most infamously under Wei Zhongxian's ascendancy and the persecution of the Donglin moralists. Yet the machine of governance still runs. Examinations recruit talent. County magistrates adjudicate fields and floods. Ritual knits center to village in seasonal time. Late in the dynasty, strains stack. climate cools, harvests shorten, and relief lags. River works need constant labor to contain floods. The silver inflow wobbles, starving markets of cash just as frontier mobilization grows urgent. In the northeast, a new Manchu power consolidates. In the interior, peasant armies gather around charismatic leaders promising justice and food. In 1644, rebel forces take Beijing. Manchu banners enter and claim the mandate. Southern Ming courts resist for years, but the story has turned. Ming matters because it standardized a feeling of normal China, a Beijing court fed by the canal, law codes and rights that officials could carry to any county, brick towers on windy ridges, and export porcelains on tables far from home. It also proved that prosperity requires active maintenance, canals dredged, dikes repaired, salaries paid, factions managed, silver trusted. When maintenance slips, walls and ledgers alone cannot hold the realm. To read Ming correctly is to see both scale and hesitation. An empire with the capacity to project power across oceans and mountains, and a habit of retreating to safe forms, walls, codes, and rituals when the bill comes due. Those forms, however, become scaffolds for what follows. The next dynasty will borrow the canals, keep the capital, widen the borders, and ride a population boom into a high plateau of power and pressure. Porcelains shining, silvers flowing. Now watch the borders balloon and the pressure quietly build. Chapter 9. High Qing. Expansion, prosperity, pressures. High Qing is administration at continental scale. The dynasty that entered from the northeast in the 17th century now rules as a self-conscious, multi-ethnic empire. At the center sits a Manchu court that speaks Manchu and Chinese, commands 8 banners and the Green Standard Army, and manages Han, Mongol, Tibetan, and Muslim subjects with different toolkits. Governing is part language, part geography, part choreography, rites at the capital, patrols on the steppe, surveys on the river, and reports flowing up the chain each moon.
令文能立刻上路，按序收起，转成内阁。今日先阅核武。
3 reigns set the tone. Kangxi stabilizes the realm after early rebellions, reins in powerful princes, invites Jesuit astronomers to recalibrate calendars and map the empire, and draws the first durable treaties with Russia at Nerchinsk, 1689. Yongzheng tightens the books, reforming tax remissions, consolidating granaries, auditing magistrates, and pushes administration down into the counties with a zeal that terrifies lazy officials and comforts diligent ones. Qianlong presides over the Grand Plateau. Art commissions and literary projects multiply. Borders expand. The court becomes both a museum and a war office. Expansion is not a slogan. It is a logistics schedule. Campaigns against the Zhonghar power in Inner Asia dismantle a steppe rival and extend Qing administration into Xinjiang, with garrisons, new prefectures, and resettlement schemes. Mongolia is bound through banners and leagues. Tibet is managed via imperial residence, ambans, and ritual patronage, punctuated by interventions when succession or rivals threaten order. Taiwan is drawn firmly into the map. Yunnan and Guizhou see experiments in Gaitu Guiliu, transforming hereditary native chieftaincies into regular counties. Every frontier solution is a local compromise. Use the language people obey, custom, monastery, lineage, or market. Then tie it back to the capital with seals, stipends, and inspections. Prosperity rises with people. New World crops, maize and sweet potatoes, widen the margin where farms can survive. Rice systems intensify with better water control. Mulberry groves feed silk. Cotton spreads as a household industry. Population soars, hundreds of millions, pushing settlement into hills and margins and creating a rural world thick with tenancy, lineage trusts, and seasonal migration. County seats grow into market towns. River ports hum with boats and brokers. The state counts, cajoles, and occasionally just watches as private networks solve what magistrates cannot. Markets thicken into systems. The Grand Canal still carries grain north to feed the capital. Salt, tea, and copper taxes pay the clerks and troops. In the south, the Canton system funnels foreign trade through a controlled gate. Kohong merchants guarantee duties and discipline. Tea, silk, and porcelain sail out, and silver flows in. Silver greases taxes and salaries, but trust requires rhythm. When imports lag or remittances fail, prices bite. Domestic finance expands in the shadows. Native banks, lineage treasuries, merchant credit, creating a flexible but fragile money world. On paper, literati governance reaches its most refined form. The examination system recruits by the tens of thousands. A scholar's brush can lift a family across generations. The emperor is everywhere, and also far away. In edicts annotated in vermilion, in county schools where boys recite commentary, in inspection tours where gentry line roads with polite fear, Kangxi's dictionary, and the complete library of the four branches, Siku Chuanshu, catalog the canon and the empire's memory. Preservation and censorship in one gesture. Orthodoxy polishes, dissent is pruned. The line between moral guardianship and surveillance grows thin. Culture is confident and busy. Workshops at Jingdezhen fire porcelains that carry imperial marks and private tastes. Suzhou looms weave silk that turns silver into fabric. Painting court styles both courtly and literati. Novels and opera reflect a society at once orderly and witty. Jesuit perspective and pigments flirt with Chinese brush conventions in court ateliers. Court gardens, especially at the summer palace complexes, stage an empire in miniature. Mountains, lakes, borders, curated as myth. The river is a barometer. Yellow River levees demand endless labor. The canal needs dredging, or grain piles up, and prices spike in the capital. Flood control is politics. Repair keeps the mandate's face clean. Failure exposes it. In the late Qianlong years, mismanagement and corruption, personified by the meteoric rise of Hushen, erode the reforming habits of earlier decades. Meanwhile, ecological pressure shows in quieter signs. Hills stripped for fuel, soil tired, forests thinned, and villages balancing on narrower margins as families subdivide land to feed many mouths. The outside is changing too. Maritime trade widens global dependency. Industrial shifts abroad will soon tilt bargaining power at the treaty table. The Macartney Embassy, 1793, arrives asking for a new commercial relationship and a resident envoy. The court performs confidence that masks caution and curiosity. For the moment, the world still comes to Canton on Qing terms. But the terms are aging while the ships outside grow steel bones the court cannot yet see. Underneath the gloss, friction accumulates. Taxes collected in silver fluctuate with supply. Granary systems suffer leakage and false reports. Garrisons on distant frontiers become expensive habits. Local unrest flickers. Miao uprisings in the southwest. Banditry, lineage feuds, managed case by case until the docket grows too full. As the long 18th century closes, the White Lotus movements break out in north-central provinces, mixing millenarian promise with practical rage against levies and corvée. The state still wins, but the cost, money, trust, and focus, signals that the plateau is tilting.
To read Hai Qing well is to credit both skill and luck. Administrators built feedback loops, exams, inspections, memorials, granaries that amplified good years. Climate and crops gave them a long run of good years to amplify. When the weather turned and the world outside accelerated, those same loops proved slow and easy to jam. The empire was not asleep. It was heavy. Heavy things move majestically, until they do not. What endures is the template of a multi-ethnic Chinese empire with a northern capital, canal-fed logistics, a moral bureaucracy, and markets stitched to villages. The sense of Chineseness now includes inner Asian borders and peoples. The court performs as both Confucian patriarch and steppe Khan, monk patron and merchant umpire. That composite identity survives later shocks. But the pressures we have named, money, ecology, corruption, and the changing world, are already the first pages of the next chapter's crisis. Tea out, silver in, then cannons knock, and contracts get very unequal. Brace for treaty ports and upheaval. Chapter 10. Opium Wars, Treaty Ports and Upheaval. The 19th century's hinge is maritime. British merchants, shut to most markets by the Canton system, push opium into China to balance tea and silver accounts. Crackdowns trigger escalation. In the First Opium War, 1839 to 1842, steamships, rifled guns, and professional logistics beat river junks and city walls meant for another age. The Treaty of Nanjing opens treaty ports, cedes Hong Kong, fixes low tariffs, and normalizes a new reality. Diplomacy backed by industrial force. The Second Opium War, 1856 to 1860, deepens the regime. Allied fleets sail upriver, sack the Summer Palace complex, and impose new treaties that legalize more trade categories, expand mission rights, and station foreign envoys at Beijing. Extraterritoriality moves jurisdiction over foreigners from Chinese courts to consular ones. Most favored nation clauses replicate concessions across powers. Customs revenue is reorganized with foreign help to guarantee indemnities, a fiscal lifeline that also embeds surveillance in the budget. Shock at sea meets fire on land. The Taiping movement, 1850s to 1864, builds a theocratic state in the Yangtze heartland, captures Nanjing, and threatens the empire's grain and tax spine. The Nian, Panthay, and Dungan uprisings in the north and southwest further drain troops and granaries. Order returns only through hybrid fixes. Provincial armies, like Zheng Guofan's Xiang army, local financing, and foreign-led or foreign-trained units, e.g., the ever-victorious army, that mix Chinese command with Western drill and guns. Saving the dynasty decentralizes it. Reform grows from necessity. The self-strengthening movement aims to use China's essence, borrow the West's tools. Arsenals, shipyards, telegraphs, and translation bureaus bloom at treaty ports and provincial capitals. The Zhongli Yamen becomes a foreign office. The Imperial Maritime Customs funds both the court and modern hardware. Schools teach mathematics and languages alongside the classics. Missions and merchants help circulate machines, maps, and new vocabularies of rights and law. Treaty ports change society. Shanghai becomes a laboratory. International concessions police their own streets. Chinese entrepreneurs build banks and mills. Newspapers knit readers into a fast public, and guilds adapt to a world of consuls and contracts. Urban life accelerates under foreign flags and Chinese capital. A new politics of petitions, boycotts, and chambers of commerce learns to speak both to magistrates and ministers abroad. But strategy stumbles. The navy and arsenals impress on paper, lag in doctrine and maintenance. The Sino-French War, 1884 to 1885, over Tonkin, and the Sino-Japanese War, 1894 to 1895, over Korea, expose brittle command and budget shortcuts. The Beiyang fleet sinks, and the court signs humiliating terms. Korea exits the tribute system. Taiwan is ceded. Indemnities mount. The lesson, painfully learned. Borrowing tools without restructuring institutions is not modernization. It is a stall. Reformers tackle the structure and hit the ceiling. In 1898, the 100 Days Reform tries to turn exams practical, build new schools, and trim sinecures. Conservative backlash freezes the program and executes its most famous voice, Tan Sitong. Then backlash turns outward. The Boxer Uprising, 1900, channels anti-foreign anger into attacks on missions and legations. An international expedition relieves the siege and imposes the Boxer Protocol with more indemnities, garrisons, and routes for pressure. The court survives by conceding future reform. It also loses more room to maneuver. After the fires, late new policies edge toward a constitutional monarchy. Provincial assemblies convene, new ministries appear, and military reorganization begins. Exams are revised, then abolished, 1905, severing a ladder that linked villages to the state for centuries. Chambers of commerce, press, and schools multiply faster than the center can integrate them. In the provinces, new elites learn to raise money and soldiers without waiting for Beijing's permission. That competence will soon rewrite sovereignty. The moral of this chapter is not only that guns and treaties hurt, it is that shocks forced experiments that changed who could govern. Treaty port capitalism, provincial armies, and new schools created actors the late Qing could neither fully command nor ignore. A polity built to channel virtue from the throne downward now had to negotiate with newspapers, merchants, students, and officers who had tasted coordination without the court. By chapter's end, the empire has more rails and cables, more guns and shipyards, more newspapers and assemblies, and less authority to make them all obey. The center still claims the mandate. The peripheries now claim the means. The next turn is not a foreign war, but a domestic conclusion drawn from decades of crisis. If the house cannot reform fast enough, someone else will inherit it. From steamships to street crowds, pack a banner. We're heading to 1911, where the map keeps its borders, but changes its boss. Chapter 11, 1911 Revolution, Empire to Republic. Revolutions rarely start from zero. They start from yesterday's fixes. After the treaty port shocks, the Qing tried to modernize without breaking the frame. New policies built schools, police, provincial assemblies, reformed the army, and trimmed old sinecures. The exams were abolished in 1905, ending a ladder that had tied villages to the court for centuries, and new academies sent students abroad with fresh vocabularies of parliament, contract, and nation. Chambers of commerce learned to coordinate money and opinion. Newspapers learned to speak in days, not decades.
the state grew tools and actors who could use them without waiting for Beijing. The spark came where reform met money: railways. When the court tried to centralize and collateralize provincial railway projects, investors and gentry in Sichuan launched the Railway Protection Movement. Protests met arrests, strikes met troops. On October 10, 1911, a mutiny by units of the new army in Wuchang lit the fuse. Cities and provinces declared independence in a rolling cascade. Telegraph wires carried proclamations faster than any imperial courier could contradict them. What looked like a palace problem became a map problem. A provisional government formed at Nanjing. Sun Yat-sen, organizer, fundraiser, exile, returned and was elected provisional president on January 1, 1912. He offered a flag and a vocabulary. The three principles of the people: nationalism, democracy, people's livelihood, promised a nation larger than a dynasty. A provisional constitution sketched civil rights, ministerial responsibility, and a parliament. But constitutions do not command armies, and the best army belonged to Yuan Shikai and the Beiyang officers who had trained under late Qing reforms. The revolution turned into a negotiation. Empress Dowager Long Yu, regent for the child emperor Puyi, waged civil war against terms. Sun agreed to yield the presidency if Yuan would secure abdication and accept a republic. On February 12, 1912, the throne issued an edict ending imperial rule. The document framed abdication not as defeat, but as care for the people and unity. The treatment of the Qing imperial household granted stipends and allowed the young emperor to remain in the Forbidden City for a time. In form, the empire ended gently. In fact, sovereignty shifted to whoever could tax and drill. Yuan moved the center north. The capital returned to Beijing. The Beiyang machine dominated ministries and budgets. Parties tried to turn ideals into leverage. Sun's Tongmeng Hui joined other groups to form the Nationalist Party, Kuomintang, KMT. Newspapers amplified platforms and scandals. Chambers of commerce learned the arithmetic of boycotts and bond drives. Elections for a new parliament in 1912 to 1913 gave the Nationalists a commanding plurality, with Song Jiao-ren poised to lead a cabinet that could check the presidency. Then the promise met the pistol. Song Jiao-ren was assassinated at a Shanghai station in March 1913. Suspicion pointed toward circles tied to Yuan. Southern leaders raised a second revolution that fizzled against Beiyang firepower. Yuan outlawed the Nationalist Party, coerced provincial assemblies, and leaned on a giant foreign reorganization loan to fund the state without a legislature's blessing. Constitutionalism narrowed into a compact written by the presidency. Courts and newspapers felt the weight of emergency. The republic's language stayed, its checks and balances thinned. Ambition overreached again. In late 1915, Yuan tried to crown himself emperor of a new Hongxian dynasty. The title fell like a stone. Governors in the southwest launched the National Protection War. Officers who had tolerated a strong president would not salute a new throne. Within months, Yuan backed down. In mid-1916, he died, and his coalition unstuck into competing military cliques. What the abdication had prevented in 1912, a map-wide civil war, now loomed as a decentralized habit. Was 1911 a failure? Only if republic means instant parliamentarism.
Measured differently, it succeeded at 3 deep tasks. First, it rewrote legitimacy. Sovereignty now spoke the language of nation and constitution, not of an anointed house. Second, it redistributed capacity. Provincial and metropolitan militaries, assemblies, and commercial elites became independent actors the center had to bargain with. Third, it filled the public square with tools, parties, presses, schools that would train a generation to organize beyond clan and county. The costs were real. Frontier questions multiplied. Outer Mongolia declared autonomy under the Bogd Khan. Tibet moved de facto beyond Beijing's reach. Xinjiang stayed in the map through local strongmen and fragile fiscal ties. Foreign concessions remained foreign. Indemnities still siphoned customs revenue. The new state struggled to cash the checks its flag wrote. In cities, new politics hardened into new patronage. In villages, tax farmers and war levies replaced edicts with requisitions. The Republic survived by negotiation, while its ideals waited for institutions sturdy enough to carry them. Yet the script changed for good. School children learned to salute a flag, not a dragon. Newspapers debated policy, not only omens. Reformers measured government with budgets and ballots, not just rights. The old vocabulary of the mandate did not vanish. It translated. Flood control, famine relief, and honest accounts remained moral proof, but now for a public called citizens. The contest for China's future would be framed as a contest to fulfill the Republic's promise. By persuasion, if possible. By arms, if not. We end this chapter with the ink still wet on new titles. President, Premier, Parliament, and the streets loud with new habits, rallies, boycotts, strikes. The throne room is empty, the barracks are full. The next act brings foreign pressure and domestic rivalry to a boil, forcing enemies into allies and allies back into enemies. New flag, old armies, pack a banner and a hard hat. We're heading into invasion, a united front, and a feud that won't stay civil. Chapter 12. War and Civil War. Japan, United Front, split. Crisis arrives by rail and river. In 1931, the Manchurian Incident carves out a puppet state in the northeast. In July 1937, shots at the Marco Polo Bridge turn skirmish into full invasion. The nationalist government shifts the capital from Nanjing to Wuhan, and then to Chongqing. Industry, universities, and ministries evacuate upriver. Cities fall. Refugees crowd roads. The war becomes a national weather. Before the storm, rivals were already circling. The Nationalists, KMT, had driven communists from urban bases earlier in the decade. The Long March, 1934 to 35, left the CCP concentrated in the northwest. In late 1936, the Xi'an Incident, nationalist generals detaining Chiang Kai-shek, forces a recalculation, release in exchange for a united front against Japan. Cooperation is real but wary. Each side guards its army, territory, and message. Wartime China runs on improvisation. The Burma Road, and then the airlift over the hump bring Allied aid. Inland arsenals and workshops spring up. Guerrillas harass supply lines behind Japanese fronts. The price is steep. Occupation regimes fracture local authority. The Nanjing massacre becomes a wound in memory and diplomacy. Famine and bombing turn civilians into the majority of the war's suffering. In the countryside, authority often belongs to whoever can feed, police, and tax this month. Both camps build states inside the war. The nationalist government keeps international recognition, fields the largest conventional forces, and tries to hold a continental line while managing coalition warlords and a collapsing currency.
Inflation and corruption hollow legitimacy, even as soldiers die in brutal campaigns. The CCP adopts a different scale. Base areas with land rent reductions and later land reform. Literacy drives and tight local organization. Political work turns villages into logistics, grain, recruits, and intelligence. At a cost, and with a discipline that many experience as both empowerment and coercion. Allies shape the margins. The United States supplies training, aircraft, and funds to nationalist commands. Diplomats shuttle between camps to keep the front from cracking. The Soviet Union, fighting elsewhere until 1945, enters Manchuria in August of that year, smashing the Kwangtung army and loosening a trove of industry and materiel. Surrender changes the map overnight. Japanese forces lay down arms across North China and Manchuria, leaving vacuums that both Chinese camps race to fill. The Civil War after 1945 is not a simple rerun. It is a contest between two wartime legacies. The Nationalists inherit sovereignty, cities, and most foreign support. They also inherit debt, inflation, and exhausted cadres. The Communists inherit disciplined rural networks and a political story that rewards sacrifice. Manchurian factories and captured equipment help them scale from guerrillas to field armies. American mediation, the Marshall Mission, briefly pauses fighting. Talks collapse. Fronts harden from the northeast to the Central Plains. Campaign names become verdicts. In 1948-49, the Liaoshen campaign breaks nationalist power in the northeast. Huaihai, in the Central Plains, consumes men and materiel on a scale that villages will remember for generations. Pingjin encircles North China's cities. The People's Liberation Army crosses the Yangtze. Nanjing falls. Shanghai falls after a bitter defense. On 1 October 1949, a new government is proclaimed in Beijing. The nationalist government retreats to Taiwan, where it holds the Republic of China's name and institutions under emergency rule and American attention. The split is not only geography, it is program. On the mainland, a revolutionary state promises land to peasants, rectification to officials, and mobilization to rebuild a ruined economy and defend new borders. On Taiwan, a besieged state promises stability and later development, reforming over decades from martial law to electoral politics. Both claim China. Both tell their survival as proof of right. For families divided by strait and border, politics is now also kinship management. Why does this matter for our story? Because war remade capacity. Logistics, party organization, and propaganda proved as decisive as battles. Allies mattered, but so did grain receipts and village meetings. The Civil War rewarded the side that could turn mobilization into momentum and punished the side that could not turn legitimacy into trust at the marketplace. The end of empire in 1911 created new actors. The end of war in 1949 gave one actor the reach to remake daily life. We close with a paradox. The war for national survival produced two centers that both claimed to be the nation. The next chapter follows one center as it experiments with campaigns and then with markets, threading a new path through old ideas of unity, morality, and power.
Guns quiet, blueprints loud. Brace for mass campaigns, big dams, and a hard pivot to open for business.
Chapter 13. PRC Founding and Reform. Opening. A new trajectory.
On October 1st, 1949, a new government announced more than a flag. It promised to turn wartime mobilization into peacetime capacity. Land for peasants, jobs for workers, borders defended, and a society remade along collective lines. Early years were about consolidation and basic needs. Land reform broke great estates and redistributed fields. Campaigns targeted bandits, opium, and old tax habits. Grain procurement fed cities and armies, while a planned economy took shape around work units, ration coupons, and 5-year plans. The hukou residence system fixed people to places so that scarce food, housing, and jobs could be allocated in order. War arrived quickly. The Korean War tested factories and railways and bound security policy to industrial planning. Soviet advisors and loans helped build steel, power, and heavy industry. Institutes trained engineers. Blueprints and textbooks taught a generation to build a state like a machine. Politics surged through that machine. Campaigns linked morality to production targets. Meetings and struggle sessions tried to make ideology a daily technology of supervision. Ambition outran capacity in the Great Leap Forward, 1958 to 61. Rural communes promised to pool labor and leap past scarcity. Backyard furnaces promised steel without mills. Targets rose, statistics followed, and procurement bit deep into village stores just as weather and policy failures combined. The result was catastrophe. Famine in many provinces, households broken by hunger, trust in numbers ruined. Recovery meant retreat, smaller units, more realistic quotas, a slow repair of the food system, while debates at the top hardened into camps that would soon fight in the open. The Cultural Revolution, 1966 to 76, was politics turned against the bureaucracy itself. Students became Red Guards. Factions battled across cities and campuses. Capitalist roaders and class enemies were paraded and purged. Production staggered. Schools shut. Experts were sent down to the countryside. The army eventually restored order. Revolutionary committees replaced normal administration in many places. Yet even in chaos, there was construction. Railways extended into the interior. New oil fields came online. Factories dispersed for security. Redundancy against invasion that also spread industry beyond the coast. Diplomacy bent with strategy. Relations with the Soviet Union curdled, while a cautious opening to the United States began. When the decade ended and leadership changed, the country had unity and a hard political memory, but also exhausted institutions and thin cupboards. In 1978, a different experiment began. At the third plenum of the 11th Central Committee, policy turned toward reform and opening. The principle was pragmatic. Keep political centrality, change the economic toolkit. In the countryside, the household responsibility system returned plots to family management under contract. Output rose, granaries filled, and incentives moved from slogans to prices. Township and village enterprises turned local initiative into workshops and light industry. Counties became laboratories where concrete, textiles, and tools scaled quickly. In cities, reform moved by dual tracks. State firms kept plan quotas, but could sell beyond them at market prices. Managers gained room to set wages and investment. Profit and loss became data, not taboo. Special economic zones, Shenzhen, Zhuhai, Shantou, Xiamen, and later Pudong, invited foreign capital and technology to test coastal manufacturing models. Customs rules, tax holidays, and joint ventures made ports into classrooms. The lesson was speed. Build roads, simplify approvals, export first,
Learn by doing. Finance and prices followed in steps. Banks separated from the treasury. Localities floated bonds. Markets for inputs and outputs widened. Wholesale markets for grain, cotton, and metals replaced some administrative queues. The price system creaked into life. Shortages eased, then vanished. Incentives realigned shop floors and harvests faster than any poster could. Migration surged as millions moved from inland counties to coastal workshops. Cities sprawled. An urban middle class took shape around housing reform, private business licenses, and the growth of services. The state, still the largest shareholder in key sectors, learned to steer with plans and with markets at the same time. Politics adapted but did not vacate. The party stayed atop the pyramid, setting direction, appointing cadres, and deciding the pace of change. Crises tested control. Inflation spikes, corruption scandals, and the 1989 protest movement in major cities ended in a hard reassertion of order. In 1989, pro-democracy demonstrations in Beijing ended in the Tiananmen Square massacre. After the death of Hu Yaobang in April 1989, students marched for dialogue and reform. The leadership answered with meetings, televised roundtables at the end of April, and on May 18th, a formal session with the premier. But the two sides talked past each other. Officials framed order and stability. Students insisted on accountability and a real conversation about corruption and political rights. In the early hours of May 19th, a senior leader went to the square to plead for calm, a sign that the party itself was split over how to end the standoff. The world was watching, with the Sino-Soviet summit bringing global media to Beijing in mid-May. Foreign correspondents beamed images of the hunger strike and the vast encampment to living rooms everywhere. What had begun as a campus movement had become an international story about China's future. On May 20th, martial law was declared. The first columns sent toward the city were blocked by residents who linked arms at intersections and spoke to soldiers through open truck rails. Then came a harder turn. Units brought in from outside the capital. Troops moved by road and rail from other regions were ordered to clear the streets. On the night of June 3rd into the early hours of June 4th, live fire was used as armored vehicles pushed through barricades. Civilians, workers, and students were shot along approach roads and near the square. The death toll remains disputed. Public discussion is tightly restricted inside China. In the aftermath, arrests and censorship followed. Exile scattered leaders abroad, and memory split. Official silence at home. Commemoration in private and in the diaspora. 1989 became a line in the country's political story. A moment when demands for dialogue met the limits of state power. Broadcast live to the world. Afterward, reform accelerated again, most visibly after a high-profile Southern tour in the early 1990s signaled that growth was the mandate of the moment. The economy internationalized, tariffs fell, investment rose, and trade regimes deepened, embedding factories into global supply chains. By the 2000s, the map felt new. Expressways and high-speed rail stitched regions. Container ports reached world scale. Energy grids and dam projects lit new cities. Mobile phones and then the internet rewired daily life. Entry into global trade systems widened access to markets and technology. A vast export engine printed jobs and foreign exchange. Domestic companies climbed from assembly to design. Poverty rates dropped sharply. Life expectancy and schooling rose. Consumer life multiplied its small conveniences. Apartment elevators, induction stoves, parcel delivery. Costs multiplied too. Pollution, inequality between coast and interior, and stresses on land and water demanded a new round of policy attention. The state kept experimenting. Social insurance and health schemes expanded. Rural pensions and urban medical coverage grew from pilots into systems. Targeted poverty programs shifted from slogans to ledgers. Urbanization and an expanding services sector rebalanced growth, even as industry moved inland or up the value chain. Campaigns did not disappear. They changed subject. Anti-corruption, environmental targets, and debt control sat beside industrial policy for chips, batteries, and rail. The old habit of mobilization survived inside a modern bureaucracy. What links 1949 to the present is less a single policy than a pattern. Use centralized authority to build capacity, then adjust tools when reality pushes back. In one generation, the village commune and ration coupon gave way to factory shifts and mobile pay. The ox cart gave way to freight trains and overnight delivery. The party learned to read markets without surrendering command. Society learned to navigate institutions that mix rule by law with rule by policy. Success created its own puzzles, managing scale, expectations, and a world that now depends on China as much as China depends on the world. For our story, the arc is continuity in new keys. The old engines, state power, markets, technology, and ideas, are still the engines. The mandate's moral language recurs in different clothes. Flood control and price stability remain public proofs. Anti-corruption becomes a modern virtue test. Common prosperity reframes fairness debates. The long habit of unifying territory and text endures in grids of rail and fiber. And the question that opens our series still whispers under the noise of ports and platforms. How does a civilization renew legitimacy as it changes its tools? We close not with an answer, but with a frame. China's recent decades are a reminder that history's compass still points to grain, ledgers, borders, and beliefs, now labeled with different words. To see what endures, step back from the quarter and look at the cycle. The next minutes do exactly that. Communes to megacities. Same compass, new maps. Roll into our epilogue for what really lasted.
If you enjoyed this journey, hit like and subscribe so you won't miss the next chapter. And don't forget to hype the video if you can.
Stand back from the centuries and patterns become clear. Rivers anchor capitals, frontiers test strategies, roads and canals measure the state's reach, markets thicken and thin, beliefs braid the public to the palace. Names change, tools change, but the compass points stay the same. Grain, ledgers, borders, and ideas. First, legitimacy is moral before it is military. The mandate of heaven began as theology and matured into a public technology, an audit that tied rain and rice to justice and restraint. A wise court read floods as feedback, not fate. A failing court read omens and silenced reports. The language is modernized. Price stability, disaster relief, anti-corruption, but the test persists. A center that feeds, repairs, and answers earns time. One that cannot loses the story long before it loses a city. Second, China is a written achievement. From Qin tallies to Han memorials, Tang codes to Song ledgers, Ming law to Qing surveys, the state learned to govern with text, to register people in parcels, to move grain and money by rule, to let faraway emperors act through near-at-hand pages. The examination ladder turned literacy into mobility and ethics into curriculum. Even critics used the brush to argue for better rule. A civilization that writes its laws and its history puts continuity on paper and invites the next house to sign its name beneath. Third, family is not merely private, it is a public engine. Lineages raised schools, managed granaries, arbitrated disputes and financed bridges. The partnership ran both ways. The court counted households and taxed them, but also relied on their networks to make policy real. In times of stress, the same webs fed the hungry and fielded militias, or refused levies when trust was gone. That elasticity, sometimes conservative, sometimes revolutionary, made social capital a reservoir the state could draw from, and a mirror the state could crack. Fourth, logistics is destiny. The Grand Canal and Yellow River levees are not scenic backdrops, they are central characters. When canals held depth and dikes held shape, capitals ate and armies marched. When silt rose and budgets failed, famine and mutiny followed. Every dynasty that mastered movement, grain to the north, orders to the frontier, relief to the floodplain, bought itself another chapter. Every dynasty that treated maintenance as bookkeeping discovered that bookkeeping writes history. Fifth, adaptation is a habit. Buddhism arrived by caravan and became local philosophy. Step techniques of command became imperial institutions. Paper money failed, then returned under better accounting. Treaty port technologies were first rented, then rebuilt at home. Planned targets yielded to price signals when granaries needed grain rather than slogans. The speed of change kept rising, from centuries to decades to years, but the reflex stayed. Keep what works, retire what doesn't. Name the edit as orthodoxy. These continuities explain a paradox: how a realm can collapse repeatedly without losing itself. China is not only a dynasty or a flag, it is also a grammar, a way to make legitimacy visible, a way to move resources across space, a way to argue about justice in the language of order. That grammar survived conquest, civil war, and reform. It let a new house inherit canals and codes, and it let a new century inherit rails and fiber. Continuity did not mean stasis. It meant a shared set of tools for surviving change. What then truly endured? A few durable convictions. Rule must justify itself in deeds the public can weigh. Text binds space. Statutes, budgets, and histories make the far governable. Households are civic partners, not merely subjects. Infrastructure is political theology in stone and water. Ideas travel across mountains, borders, and time, and the strongest states learn to translate, not only to teach. None of this denies tragedy. Famine and flood, purges and invasions, false numbers and failed dams. Each scar belongs in the record. But even scars instruct. They taught later courts to dredge canals before boasting, to audit granaries before festivals, to privilege competence in offices that once sold titles, to measure prosperity in kitchens and prices rather than in palaces alone. The archive of mistakes is as important as the gallery of triumphs. If you are watching from far away, it might seem that the cycle rules everything: rise, overreach, collapse, renewal. But cycles are not loops, they are spirals. Each turn rewires the capacity to respond. The tools get sharper, the map more connected, the public more literate, the expectations higher. That is why older answers rarely return unchanged. The vocabulary of virtue remains, but the instruments that prove it keep evolving. From ritual fasts to flood control, from edicts to audits, from granaries to supply chains. Our hour ends where it began, at the meeting point of rivers, frontiers, markets, and ideas. The story we traced is not a sermon about destiny. It is a ledger of choices, some wise, some costly, made by administrators and poets, soldiers and farmers, merchants and monks. Their work left an inheritance, institutions that can be repaired after shock, a culture that can argue with itself without forgetting itself, a memory that treats survival as an art. If you remember only one thing, remember the compass. Grain, ledgers, borders, beliefs. Follow those and the names will arrange themselves. Dynasties fall. Institutions mutate. Ideas endure. And in that endurance lies the thread that let a country become a nation and keeps a civilization legible to itself.